In 1994, a man wrote over 100 pages worth of treatment for his passion project movie idea. A treatment, to my understanding, is a very loose outline of what the movie's hook is, the main characters, and a brief synopsis, so it's pretty much a text version of a basic storyboard. In this case, the treatment was about a sci-fi story set 100 years in the future, where Earth is growing dying from mass overpopulation. It follows a disabled veteran of a long-forgotten war, who, after the death of his twin brother, is approached by a megacorporation he was working for and is asked to pick up where he left off. Having nothing else keeping him on Earth, he agrees and is shipped off to Alpha Centauri, where a new world with abundant resources have been discovered and began being exploited by humanity. Classic move, guys. There, he will be part of a program that allows him to inhabit the body of a genetically engineered clone, not only able to walk, but optimally survive the planet's hostile atmosphere. Over the course of the movie and his time in this alien world, he falls in love with the life there, being accepted into one of the local clans, and even falling in love with a woman. All leading to him turning on the human megacorp and fighting to protect the world from devastation to unite all peoples within that nation. The man who wrote this was James Cameron, and 15 years later, this passion project would eventually turn into Avatar. Cameron was literally limited by the technology of his time and waited until it was still not really ready and somehow brute forced his way right through anyway. Over $250 million later, not accounting for promotion, a completed movie was released, and I think it's safe to say, it was alright. I mean, the plot is a pretty basic: boy becomes blue boy meets blue girl, and fights capitalism and colonization. It is a touch questionable that our hero is the white man who decides to join the natives and lead them as a hero, but overall it's serviceable enough if you overlook the real world parallels. Even reviews from the time when hype was at an all-time high, most people praised the movie as a technological achievement and a feast for the eyes, but either made no mention of the plot or said it was very average. By any standard, it's an incredibly mediocre plot that is predictable if you've ever watched any other movie. So why did this extremely okay movie go on to become the second highest grossest film ever made, only being beaten by some 4-hour-long romance film from the 30s about, the Ku Klux Klan?
Well, unlike that period, I think it's safe to say no one wants to go back to. The setting of Avatar 2 lit the world on fire. I bought this as a prop because it's the closest you can get to the mask, and then, yeah, I'm not going to wait for the whole video because you can't hear a damn word that I'm saying. But the world of Avatar is really cool. Obviously, the movie was a technical marvel, and the level of detail was beyond anything that had ever been seen before. I mean, this is basically an animated movie for the majority of the duration, and even by today's standards, this stuff just looks real. 10-foot tall blue people move around realistically, the facial animation is absurd, but the world is the real star of the show. The world of
Part 1. Pan-depression or
The jungles of Pandora are so full of colour that every single scene, especially at nighttime, has enough saturation to make a YouTube thumbnail no editing required. All the scenes with humans are in grey, cold, industrial buildings, making any time beyond the walls quite literally feel like a different world. And it wasn't all just colour and chaos. This was well thought out and meticulously designed. They literally built a world, and it took them a whole lot longer than 7 days to do it. Take that, God. This was groundbreaking then, and honestly holds up today. The sneak wasn't wrong when they said this transformed cinema. Who did they write that one for again? Oh, This world was so realistic and beautiful that people literally became mildly depressed after watching because they realised they could never visit this place for themselves. And you think I'm making this up? Here's an article from the University of Chicago by Jonathan Mulrooney going over the phenomena experienced by many people on the Avatar fan forums.
I actually searched for the Avatar forums, and the best I could find was a site called the Tree of Souls that is seemingly a successor to the original forums, which don't appear to be online anymore. Here, one user mentions PAD, presumably post-Avatar depression, in March of 2010.
PAD refers to the, quote, strange mix of emotions, unquote, many viewers felt after watching the movie. The article mentions emotions such as giddiness and emptiness, but I believe what they're describing is fernweh that I know about because I'm very smart. And Googled it. The German concept of fernweh, also known as far sickness, or its more common cousin that's much less cool to say, wanderlust, is the longing to be somewhere you've never been. So people who watched Avatar were literally feeling homesick about a fictional alien world that they not only have never been to, but can never go to, unless James Cameron is hiding some mighty big secrets in his goatee. If you aren't one of the people that gets this feeling, try to imagine wanting to go somewhere comforting, like your home, or that of a friend or family member, or a favourite holiday destination. Now imagine that that place that you feel so peaceful and relaxed in doesn't exist, never existed, so you have never and will never experience it. It's nonsensical to talk about, and yet it's a very real feeling that I know I feel myself whenever I go back and watch the movie. after I walked out of the cinema with my head still spinning, both from the incredible scenes I just experienced and the god-awful 3D we decided to see the movie in. Slap on your 3D glasses for this segment so you can see me coming out your screen. Whee! In all seriousness, after watching the movie, I went home and laid in bed wishing I could fall asleep and wake up in the body of an avatar, free to wander the jungle, bond with my own acorn and become one of the people. I mean, I was like 9 at the time, but maybe still I could find a little one to fly around, and they exist, right? Surely they have to have kids. Obviously, technology and the planet, as far as we know, doesn't exist then and it doesn't exist today. 15 years later, we're not even close to that sort of thing. But what if we could get the next best thing? An experience that lets you explore a virtual rendition of Pandora whilst controlling your avatar through traditional means. And what if we, just like David Cameron, that's the wrong fucking Cameron, and what if we, just like Cameron, waited until technology could do this justice and provide the experience that we're truly craving? Actually, scratch that. Let's force this to run on PCs with 1GB of RAM in 2009, the Xbox 360, Wii, and even the Nintendo DS. Make the entire thing in 2 years and force the game out over a week before the movie even premieres to capitalize on Christmas sales.
Part 1.5. The first video game. Obviously not like ever. The first Avatar game. James Cameron's Avatar the game, based on James Cameron's Avatar the movie, is factually an extremely impressive game, and I swear I'm not exaggerating. The game uses the same tech Cameron and his team developed for the movie and is playable entirely in stereoscopic 3D, provided you have the tech necessary for this, which no one did or does to this day because the technology is incredibly expensive and impractical and died out. But outside of this, the game features an all-star cast directly from the movies, such as Sigourney Weaver, Stephen Lang, and Michelle Rodriguez. I mean, they have like 3 lines each, but still.
Just a small side note, Stephen Lang's character and the main antagonist of the movie is called Miles Quaritch. I don't know if you know this, but Miles is my name, and where I'm from, it's really uncommon, so I always get excited seeing it on screen, and of course, in one of my favourite movies, he's literally the biggest asshole on any planet we see. Now I have nothing left. Except Spider-Man. Anyway, back to the game. I was bought one of the 2.7 million copies sold, and on Christmas morning, tearing open that bad boy, that was as close as I was going to get to getting my ticket to Pandora.
I remember it being the first thing I booted up on Christmas Day before I was forced to come down and spend time with my family. Sorry Nana, you're cool and all, but I have a new world to explore.
For the purposes of this video, I even tracked down a PC copy since I have no idea where my Xbox is, if it works, or how to even record gameplay from it. CHMRC, this is a business expense. Please leave me alone, I'm going to lose my house.
Back then, I of course thought the game was the best thing ever, but then I was a child and I enjoyed playing games where you capture monsters to train and fight other monsters and maybe capture those too.
What? So let's replay it now with my much more refined palette and see if it's actually any good.
Part 2. My first trip to Pandora.
I bought this on eBay without really thinking, and it has a disc. My PC doesn't have a disc drive, so I had to get an external one to use it, but you only have to install it, but still. That was a great move by me, wasn't it? But you can't buy this anywhere digitally because, you don't actually own games anymore. Thanks, Ubisoft. This has aged well.
Once you get it running, which on modern hardware is no mean feat, the game opens up decently enough with our character landing on Pandora and, just like Jake Sully, we're a soldier there to do grunt work both as a human and whilst piloting an avatar. The entire game takes place before the events of the movie, making this a non-canon prequel, with the non-canon part becoming incredibly obvious by the time you reach the end. Now, since it's 2009, we don't have a proper character creator and instead choose from a selection of male and female soldiers and their avatar counterparts. This has literally no bearing on the story, so it's just a nice little role-playing touch so you can play as whatever gender or race you like, although you all end up blue in the end. It's basic stuff, but it's getting you into the mindset to roleplay as this character and experience Pandora through their eyes.
That said, don't let my use of the word roleplay fool you. This is most certainly not a role-playing game. It's entirely linear or bilinear, but we'll come back to that later. I'm simply trying to say that since this is as close as we could actually get to walk in the jungles of Pandora, it's nice to have someone that looks vaguely like you to do that with.
Anyway, after that we get straight into walking into the base to talk to people, link to our avatar so we can reference a scene from the movie that hadn't come out yet, immediately disconnect, walk across the base to talk to someone else and meet our antagonist for the evening, then we can finally talk to a pilot and get lift to some actual gameplay. Immediately, it's non-stop action by telling you to man a turret with some of the worst screen shake I have ever seen in my entire life, a trend will carry on for most of the game depending on how many guns you use.
I don't want to go through the entire game beat by beat because honestly, it'd be a lot of repetition like it was to play, and that's not really the point of this video. I'd hate to waste your time without getting any closer to the actual point of this entire thing. Anyway, so this game from 2009 that the video isn't really about starts off with sending you around to help out the RDA in human form. This lets you zip around in a few vehicles, try out a few different weapons, and take down some of the local wildlife. Classic colonizer stuff.
Eventually, you switch over to your avatar form and do the same there to test things out, and then you're given the order to follow a Na'vi said to be meeting with a mole inside the RDA. How dramatic! Turns out it's this guy. He's basically the stand-in for Sigourney Weaver, even though the game has Sigourney Weaver, but I guess paying her for more than like 6 lines wasn't in the budget. He's the scientist working with the Na'vi, who's kind of been a dick to you since you met him 15 minutes ago, so this twist is about as twisty as the A15 between Scampton and the M180.
Did I Google the straightest road in the UK just to make my joke accurate? You bet I did. Anywho, it's at this point that the game presents you with the big choice. You pick a side and either turn your back on the RDA and join up with the Na'vi, or gun down Dr. Harper and stick with the company. Which side you pick determines what campaign you're going to play and also what form you'll play it in, since if you choose the Na'vi, your human body is eventually killed during an attack, and if you choose the RDA, Harper takes out your avatar, leaving you as just a human. I also want to quickly give props to the game that at this point it duplicates your save file so you can load up from the exact point here to choose the other, so you can get the full experience without having to do the 30 minutes of extra build-up. The praise that I can give this game is very limited, so you're going to have to give me this one.
The plot from here is basically the same for both, where you're sent to different parts of the world to search for crystals, which you then use to learn a song which will help you narrow down the location of the MacGuffin. You do this exact same cycle 4 times in both campaigns, and every single time you land, you go to ask someone where to find them, and they say, "Oh yeah, I know where to find those, but first, help me out with this little job." It all essentially boils down to killing enemies, and then they tell you where to find the crystal, normally surrounded by even more enemies, rinse and repeat 3 times a level, 4 levels in a row. The only difference is obviously the people you talk to, since the human reports to the RDA and the avatar to the Na'vi, and the ending, and yeah, if you haven't gathered it already, I'm going to spoil this 15-year-old game. First up, if you choose the Na'vi, you eventually track down the location, you head over there and get to fly on the back of a great Leonoptrix just like Jake Sully, and it's basically a glorified taxi since there's no Banshee-based combat, and you're on it for like 15 seconds before you land, and it feels like shit. You then walk into a cave where the Well of Souls is, and the RDA villain dude, who I shit you not is called Commander Falco, which I thought was a joke. You touch the tree and it sends out an EMP which crashes his ship, and credits roll. No boss battle, hardly any dialogue outside of talking to your Na'vi buddy and being like, "Oh man, these humans will keep coming, this is only the beginning." It just ends. Just like that. I'd totally forgotten about this, and I actually burst out laughing through this entire sequence because who ends a video game like that? No shot. Oh my fuck. What a shit ending. I didn't even get a boss fight. Oh my god. Okay. Over on the human side, things are a little bit better, with you instead getting to fly a Dragon, which is the big gunship with guns and rockets, and use it as a taxi for 15 seconds, because there's still no real air combat in this game because the Na'vi can't shoot you, so you can shoot it like rocks, and that's it. Once you land, you find Falco already there, gone off the deep end and trying to do something to the tree that would destroy the entire planet, and apparently we don't want that because we just want to destroy the planet in our own specific way. So you have to stop him. Honestly, this was at the end of my second day playing this extremely boring game, so I kind of glossed over by this point. You actually do get a boss fight this time in the form of him being the most bullet-resistant human since 50 Cent. You beat him back and tweak the settings so the Na'vi lose connection with Awa and the planet, meaning they are pretty much entirely fucked. Quaritch gives you a call to congratulate you, followed by Dr. Grace, who says you did the right thing, which honestly might be the worst case of character assassination since basically everyone in the second movie.
However, there's also a secret third ending because you get the option on the second to last human mission to turn your back on the RDA. Again, you still stay in human form, but you can turn your back on them. If you do this, I have no idea what happens because I would literally have to play the entire game again, and I would honestly rather eat a bowl of cold snot than do that at this point. According to a game FAQ post from 13 years ago, you basically get the Na'vi ending but in your human form, so I really didn't miss out on much, and please don't make me play this game again, it's so boring.
Honestly, even when I first played this, I don't think the story was the main draw for me. I mean, the story of the films isn't really why you watch them, so it only really makes sense that the game would be the same. You of course watch the movies to see the world in all of its hyper-detailed glory. Now obviously, the Xbox 360 isn't able to render scenes like we see in the movie. Honestly, PCs today still aren't even all that close. The best looking games we have right now are Cyberpunk, and even then, maxed out with all the 1 frame per second I get, it doesn't look as good as the first film. All that being said, there's more to graphics than pure raw visual fidelity and power, and the density of the foliage as far as the actual world design goes is actually pretty good. Everything feels like it's in the same world as a movie, with dense jungles being broken up by dirty grey industrial buildings. The dark areas are where the game really shines, with all the glowing flora and fauna really making up for the lack of resolution. It's just about enough to get immersed in the world, and I really have to take my hat off to the Ubisoft team because they nailed it before the final movie even came out. Now I'm sure Jimbo gave him tons of reference, but still, the finished movie came out after the game, so chances are they didn't see the 100% finished product until it was too late to make a difference.
Now for the part of this game that's arguably the most important, the gameplay. This is getting its own entire part, and spoilers.
Part 3. This game is really, really boring.
Look, the world is pretty and the story sucks, so the gameplay here has to be really solid, otherwise you've got a boring game that's nice to walk around. And sadly, that's exactly what we've got. Again, I'm going to split this up by the campaign since it's a fairly different experience depending on what side you're on, so Na'vi first.
Pretty much immediately upon starting the Na'vi sections of the campaign, you unlock the base forms of all of the weapon types and skills. For weapons, you have the bow, which is always equipped, a crossbow, staff, mace, dual blades, and machine gun. You know in the movies how the arrows are pretty much enough to one-shot anything, even a dude in one of those amp suits or the Scorpion helicopters? Well here, a fully charged shot is sometimes not enough to take down a single grunt enemy. Pair that with a painfully slow fire rate, and it is pretty much pointless to use. The crossbow is better, but it has like 3 shots before you run out, and ammo can be hard to come by, so that's out. The machine gun is... it's fine, but I knew I was in for a lot of guns with the RDA, so I really wanted to avoid that if possible. And so, that left the melee weapons as my main workhorse for the whole 4 hours, and would you believe it? Only 2 of them were actually useful. The dual blades can one-shot humans, and the mace is great for taking down amps, so I stuck with both of them for pretty much the entire game, aside from when I was forced to use ranged, in which case the crossbow came in handy.
See, the problem with this weapon system isn't that some of them suck. I'm totally okay with some weapons being better than others. That's just how games work. The problem is, I unlock all of them at their base forms at the start, and over the course of the game, not much changes, so why would I ever switch from the things that I like using? When I level up and unlock new weapons, the best versions of what I'm using are automatically equipped. So once I got locked in, I just stopped looking at the new unlocks because they didn't really change much at the end of the day. It was just stat increases, more damage, more ammo, whatever, doesn't really change much. And the exact same can be said for skills. I got set up with sprint, heal, reduce damage taken, and increase damage dealt, and never changed them again. My light just died. I swear I didn't steal that bit from H-Bomb Guy, the light literally died. Okay, that'd be a really weird thing to try and copy from him. Like the most specific sort of plagiarism. And you know, I'm not a gay raconteur, so I'm not gonna do that. In case you're wondering, the other options for skills are Summon a Beast and this big Windstorm, both of which seem to do literally nothing, so just got ditched immediately. So I'd level up and yet feel like there was no progression since I was using the exact same stuff, and only now the blades that one-shot the grunt enemies, they still one-shot the grunt enemies and don't really do much more damage to anything else. Okay.
And while we're on the topic of progression and XP, there's plenty of levels in the game to work through, but the problem is, you'll get to max level by playing the story and taking part in only as much combat as you need to. So, you have no reason at all to do anything but the bare minimum. Each area of the map technically has side quests, but all they are activate all the trees, remove the fog of war, and destroy enemy ammo boxes. So why would I ever bother to do those when it's just wandering around the map and I'll level up anyway, so who cares? It's like they made all of this progression but then just shit themselves that people wouldn't be able to see it all, so made it possible to unlock it by just playing the bare minimum of the game. Add on the fact that leveling up offers no actual value outside of making you tankier with new armors, and I never checked what I unlocked once after I got settled.
Speaking of armor, it's not uncommon that over the course of the game you get better gear, but the problem is enemies don't get better, so the game slowly becomes way easier. Look at this early battle where I'm fighting for my life, burning through my revives and have to play safe, compared to this later one when I can just charge headlong enemies with no real risk. So now progression isn't just pointless, it's making the game far easier, and in doing so, making this boring game even more boring, because now there's not even a challenge aside from staying awake. And believe me, I struggle to do that.
I realise that I forgot to mention what you're actually fighting. It's mainly human grunts with varying shapes of guns, but pretty much all of these die in a single dual blade hit, so it really makes no difference. The amp suits offer a little bit more challenge, but once you close the gap and start wailing on them with your mace, they get stun locked until you take them down, so not much there either. There's also RDA controlled animals, which are like normal animals, but have these cute little backpacks. They just charge straight at you, so dual blades again. And lastly, the only units that is actually threatening are the flying Scorpion choppers, because they have stupid high damage output, perfect accuracy, and can only be attacked with ranged weapons, all of which suck tremendously. Over on the human side, things are literally exactly the same, but now it's all gun-based. To be fair to them, the range of guns you have is moderately more exciting than Na'vi melee, but don't get your hopes up too high. You have 2 machine guns, a shotgun, grenade launcher, flamethrower, and pistols, which are always equipped. Again, I just chose whatever worked for me, which was the machine gun for everything, shotgun for anything that got close, and a flamethrower because it's the only weapon that can easily kill the plants, so you really need it. I might have liked to use the grenade launcher, but I didn't get a choice without going in and out of the menu, and fuck that. The enemies for the human side are obviously the Na'vi and then mainly animals and plants. The only thing that poses a real threat are ranged Na'vi, since they can focus fire on you pretty quick, but honestly a constant stream of bullets from a machine gun took down basically everything pretty easily, with the exception of plants. I for sure found this to be the far easier playthrough, since enemies normally came at me rather than firing from a distance, meaning I just planted my feet and held down the trigger for victory. The skills are literally the same, apart from now you can call in an airstrike and knock enemies back, which I don't care about because they're useless, and making myself tank it and deal more damage is better than literally anything else. Progression is just the same and easy to do by just playing the story, and armor only gets better, making the game so painfully boring and easy to play that it's a wonder it got through QA.
Now I know I'm coming at this from a person living in 2023 where games have evolved a lot since then, so let's be fair and compare this to some games from the same year. And remember, this game came out in December, so it has a few extra months in the oven than most of these I'm going to mention. Batman Arkham Asylum, you start out with basic gadgets and over the course of the game unlock new ones alongside skills to enhance your abilities even further, like the Batman, really makes you feel like the Assassin's Creed 2, you start out with literally nothing and earn more exciting assassin gear as you go, eventually becoming the ghostly killing machine that is Ezio Auditore da Firenze. And even The Sims 3, you start with nothing and become a slave to your job to eventually buy the biggest house possible, build the most ridiculous mansion you've ever seen, and leave it to your child you made with your neighbor's wife before drowning them all in a swimming pool for their sin. It's not age that's the problem with this game, it's just not well thought out. It's pretty clear that this progression was rushed and thrown into the game at the last minute because they realized that playing with the exact same stuff for the whole game might get boring. The problem is, you play with the exact same stuff for the whole game anyway, and because all you unlock is tiny improvements on what you already have, there's no point checking and going into the menus to see what you got or moving out of your comfort zone. Everything stays the exact same functionally, it's just they do more damage.
I realise that I've also forgotten to mention the modes of traversal. I did say earlier about the Great Leonoptrix and Dragon at the end of the game, but you also get a few other ways to move around the map on both sides. The Na'vi can use die horses in most levels if you can find one and bind with their Ikran in the first area, only to not see it until the second to last one. Aside from that, it's a lot of spamming the sprint skill to move as fast as possible from crystal to crystal. Both of these are fine but offer no combat, meaning you just end up walking past extra quote-unquote gameplay and taking even more of the challenge out of this already easy game.
Oh, also, you don't make the physical bond with either. I know it doesn't matter, it's no effect on gameplay, but come on man, it's literally the way they tame and control these creatures. It's the one thing that they do, and you didn't put it in game.
You can also ride a Thanator like once, but honestly it's just a bigger horse that can use melee attacks that hit nothing and prevent movement. Over on the human side you have this little buggy, the amp suits, and a scorpion helicopter. The buggy appears the most and is literally just a car to get from A to B. It's fine, but it controls super heavy and yet will flip if you hit a route at 5 miles an hour from the wrong angle, so it's a little bit of a struggle to get anywhere. The amp suit is honestly fine. You move about as fast as a normal human running, but have a big gun, so it can take enemies down pretty easily from ranged. It's not that fast, so I normally just took the buggy and ignored combat, but then again, I was trying to run through the game as fast as possible, so I didn't die of boredom. The Scorpion is marginally better than the Ikran because you actually have weapons. However, all you can really shoot at is Ikran nests for a single objective because, again, there's no air combat, so anything else to shoot up there, and you can't really look down to fire at the ground without being landed either. Again, there's a handful of other vehicles you can use once or twice, like the boat, rocket truck thing, and this weird ATV with rockets, but they're pretty much all the same once you get down to it. I'd say it's a tie because while the humans can use weapons, A, I don't see why you ever would use them, and B, wheels struggle a lot more than hooves on the forest floor, so it evens out.
So yeah, in summary, you move jankily around a pretty world, taking part in fairly boring and repetitive gameplay to progress through an equally boring and repetitive story, and then the game just ends with varying levels of abruptness depending on your choices. Like VLC Media Player just ended with a level of abruptness. Reviews at the time didn't seem too convinced, with the highest I could find being from IGN, who gave it a 6.8, which, if you know IGN, is scathing. The review said all of the work went into making the game world look good, and the fact that you could play in 3D is something that hardly any other game can do, for a reason. However, aside from that, there's nothing here, and I tend to agree with this shockingly enough. Even with all of my love for Pandora and the nostalgia I have for this game, the main feeling I had when playing both the human campaign and the Na'vi campaign was boredom. The world was pretty, but it ended up feeling like a really fancy frame for a picture of a grey wall. The game just really suffered from exaggerated versions of these same problems that the movie had. It was really a tech demo to see what could be achieved if you pushed the tech to the absolute limit and introduced 3D to a medium that hadn't really seen it before. However, pretty much anyone can go to the cinema and watch a movie in 3D, but literally no one, apart from like 5 people, have a 3D capable TV at home, meaning practically no one can make use of the main draw of this game. Now, I'm not going to give this game a score because it wouldn't be fair. Even if I'd try to, I'd be comparing it to modern games, but I think it speaks for itself that this first swing at an Avatar game didn't quite hit the mark and give the audience that window into Pandora that they were craving for. This left Avatar fans wondering for years what the next attempt would look like, when it would come, how long would they have to wait for it? And I suppose that really does actually bring me to
Part 4. getting to the actual point of the video.
I mean, clearly I've been watching too many H-Bomber Guy videos, and can you blame me? Because obviously this is the actual point of the video. Like, I never started out with the intent of reviewing a game from 14 years ago that I haven't played in years, but I started writing about this game and I felt like the context was more important than what I actually thought. I actually started just writing about the new game like a normal review, but it just didn't feel right. The reasons I feel the way I do about this game aren't really down to the game itself, so diving in without explaining anything first just wouldn't make any sense. It isn't like I stumbled onto this game and I fell in love like I did with Dredge. No, this is something I was already interested in, and because of my love of the franchise and the world, when I finally got my hands on it, it changed everything. Bit dramatic. Am I recording? Yes.
I never really thought about making this video before I played the game. Full disclosure, I'm in the Ubisoft Creator Program due to Anno, and I saw I could claim a key for it and I decided to give it a try, without them randomly accepting my request despite the game being realistically so far out of the wheelhouse of my channel. I'd probably never have played the game, or at least not as early as I did. If there is somehow a way to communicate to the multiverse version of me that never got to play this game, all I have to say is, lucky sucker!
I mentioned on the podcast before the game came out that I was looking forward to it being a very mid-game with the Avatar world, and that'd be enough for me. I'd hop on it, run around the world for a bit until I inevitably got bored because, you know, Ubisoft games, and move on. What I didn't expect was to fall in love all over again and feel some of the most joy that I've had playing anything for a very long time. Now let me clarify, the joy I get from playing this game is different than something that I get playing Baldur's Gate 3 or Spider-Man 2 or Gollum. Each of those games are objectively good, with one of them being a once-in-a-generation masterpiece. Gollum. The first few hours wandering around the Emerald Forest are some of the most impressive gaming experiences I've ever had. Swinging around New York, fighting the odd crime and laughing at Miles and Peter's dumb jokes is almost endlessly fun to do. But playing Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is a different experience entirely. To explain what I mean, let's go through the intro of the game, because if you ask me, and you're watching this far into the video, so you are, the game opens incredibly strongly after 20 minutes of generic cutscenes. You know how to get me from the start, Ubisoft.
The game begins with you and some other Na'vi learning about human life in an RDA classroom. You meet Alma, who's kind of like a mother figure to the group, since you're all taken from your families at a young age. And you meet John Mercer, quite possibly the most generic antagonist to ever live, but we'll come back to him later. He tells you how racist he is, kills your sister, orders to have the rest of you killed, but just at the last second, Alma saves you and hides you in cryosleep. When you awake, she tells you it's been a long time, and moments after you wake up, Mercer shows up to be a bit more racist, and you begin your escape. Another side tangent, Alma sends you off to get some food after you wake up, and on your way back, here's Mercer coming, so literally, everyone leaves you behind and escapes. Like, you walk back out the hallway you just went down seconds ago, and every single person is gone. No one left behind, except you, of course. Anyway, you make your escape through the RDA facility, learning basic game mechanics as you go. Did you know that crouching makes it harder for enemies to see you, the giant blue person in the completely grey and well-lit room? Eventually, you're on the final stretch, and you can quite literally see the light at the end of the tunnel. Plant life has fought its way inside of the base, and as you close to the opening, more and more of your view shifts from cold grey to vibrant green. Finally, you break out into the jungle, and the music swells and you can take in the world for the first time. I so wish I had my Shadowplay running the first time I experienced this, because it literally took my breath away and made me feel emotions that no other game has made me feel.
If you for some reason follow me on any social media outside of YouTube, you might be aware that I love the Lake District. Here in the UK, if you have no idea what that is, it's basically a large area or district of the UK. It's got all the lakes in it. I personally think it's the most beautiful place, at least in the UK, and it is quite possibly my favourite place to go in the world, hence why I go there every single chance that I get. The main road taking you into the lakes begins by taking you over some rolling hills, and once you crest that final hill, you get to this 180-degree view of Lake Windermere surrounded by mountains, and every time I see it, I get this incredibly giddy and excited feeling. And in 2020, when I'd not left my house in months because of, you know, the reason, I saw this, and I'm not ashamed to say, I shed a couple of tears.
I didn't realise it, but apparently I have a video from this actual year I'm talking about. God, look at that.
Now all of this is immediately ruined by the fact that you then go down the other side of this hill and get stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic for the final 2 miles, aka 40 minutes of this journey, but still, it's this feeling that I always describe as coming home and being at peace. Even though I've never lived there, I'd love to, but I'm too poor. It's super expensive, but it's great. So why am I taking so much time out of a video this long to tell you about my favorite UK holiday destination? Well, this is the exact same sort of feeling I had when I first set foot on Pandora in Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, the video game I'm talking about. See, it's connected.
It was like I was coming back to a place I've been before and felt totally at peace in. It was like seeing my childhood bedroom recreated perfectly down to the detail on every leaf, and the musical score was like a warm blanket wrapping me up to keep me safe. Let me give the developers way more credit than I should for a second and say that this long, extended intro with like 5 cutscenes, 3 time jumps, all being inside the same grey RDA facility is genius. We see nothing of Pandora until you finally escape the facility, and the contrast makes the jungle all the more beautiful. There's not so much as a houseplant inside of the base. Everything is grey and lifeless, and outside you quite literally can't take a step without seeing beautiful, dense flora and/or fauna. The intro to the game is far too long. I literally had to do it in 2 sittings because I hopped on when I had like a spare 20 minutes and I didn't even get to play yet. However, the anticipation and desire to escape this build is incredible. So, if intentional, excellent work Ubisoft. If not, you bastards are lucky that I love this world. Speaking of which, Part 5. The entire world.
Honestly, it's really hard to talk about the world of this game because, if we're being honest, most of the creative work had already been done at this point. There's 2 movies worth of incredibly high reference footage, so all the dev team had to do was recreate that as best they can on mortal computers. Easy, right? With a grand total of 0 hours of game development experience, I'm gonna say yes. Very easy indeed. The game's run on the Snowdrop engine, which has been used for both Division games, as well as Mario & Rabbids. It's also been used for the upcoming Star Wars Outlaws game, so if that game looks half as good as this, then my hype just raised my desk a couple of centimeters off the ground. God, you can tell I was sat down when I wrote this, can't you?
There's a video where the dev team talk about the technological leaps the game has made to push the engine forward, allowing for high levels of detail without compromising on performance, intelligent AI, and much improved lighting.
See, I'm stupid and I don't really know what they're talking about, but I have eyes and they can see things okay, and I like to look at pretty things. So I can tell you that this game is really bloody nice to look at. Every direction you look has astounding levels of detail with dense, varied plant life covering every surface, all the way from the grass and moss to the trees the size of skyscrapers.
In the daytime, this all looks fantastic, but at night, oh my god, it's on a whole other level. Practically everything has some form of bioluminescence, which is just a fancy word that means stuff glows because it's alive. The forest floor lights up green. Most leaves on plants give off more vibrant blues and pinks, just about any colour you can think of. And the best part is that each of these colours aren't just to make the world beautiful. They do that, but it also serves a purpose. Practically every single plant has a name, habitat, and a bit of flavour text for some extra spice. You can navigate by working out which plants will grow near your objective and use the light of everything around you to see in the dark. And the second part of my very poor definition of bioluminescence has a lot more impact here. This world is alive. Obviously, if you've seen the movies, you know that well, the god of this planet is provably and quantifiably real, and so everything on the planet is living and connected. The Na'vi aren't just a cult following some guy who says he's the son of their creator. How'd this get here? Their religion is real, their god is real, and everything in their world, living and transferring energy is completely real. Even if you don't buy into all of that, this world simply is living, especially at night. The world gets darker and lights up literally from all of the life everywhere around you.
Now, would I put this game up against the gold standard of living worlds in video games like The Witcher 3 or Baldur's Gate? No. But they're living in a totally different sense. The continent and Faerun feel so alive because of the people and wildlife that all act realistically, behave like they should, and react to you in a way that seems true to life. Those worlds feel alive, not because of how they look and how they sound, but because of how they behave. There could be no animals or people in sight on Pandora, and this place still feels like a real and especially living place. Don't get me wrong, the animals and people help, and I'll come back to them later, but they're more like extra flares in an already stacked performance.
I can't express just how much I enjoy wandering around this world day or night, taking in the sights and being floored by every new detail I discover. Speaking of day or night, the lighting in this game is phenomenal, with some of the most realistic skyboxes I've seen in a long while. I wish I had a beefier monitor with some HDR to fully experience those sunrises and sets, but even with what I have now, it's breathtaking.
Have you ever been out on a hike or watching a sunset or seen something particularly beautiful in nature and taken a moment to just be still and look at your surroundings? Going back to the lakes, when hiking, I regularly do this, and just like an old man I am say, oh, I love it here. I also regularly did this whilst playing the game. It's easy to get wrapped up in whatever you're doing at the time, but occasionally I'll just stop, look up or around, stop moving, and just take in what I'm looking at and be amazed. I literally look like an E3 rest in peace demo player showcasing the game. All you need is some bullshit multiplayer chatter, and you got yourselves a gameplay trailer with my footage, folks.
How many times playing this game am I going to come across something that literally just stops me in my tracks and makes me just...
Stop, criminal scum. You violated the law. You will pay in blood.
I remembered this whilst rewatching the movie, but the planets that thwump into the ground when you get near them in-game, and if you approach them slowly, your character even reaches out their hand to touch them, just like he does in the movie. Most of the time, you'll just sprint through these once you know that you can, and you'll never even see this. It's just little touches like that that make this feel like an actual, real, living world. Another thing worth mentioning while we're talking about the world is weather. Like any place that isn't England, Pandora has a range of different weathers which roll through at regular intervals to keep things fresh. It's mainly just varying levels of rain, going from a light drizzle to fog to a full-blown hurricane, but each option is executed to perfection and blend seamlessly into each other. The thunderstorms are a particular favourite of mine.
Something about the distant booms and the heavy rain pattering against the roof and trickling down the gutter, and oh, makes me feel good. Louis the dog is less fond, which does tend to sour the mood a little bit, but still, I love a good storm. Thanks.
This game probably has the best thunderstorms out of any game I've ever played. They're somehow a perfect blend of extreme but also realistic. Lightning regularly strikes the ground near you, leaving charred, flaming patches of terrain. They stop burning and heal up in moments, but honestly that's how this world works, so I can't really be mad. Standing still by a tree and listening to the rain coming down and the huge cracks of thunder, it really sounds like you could just be right there. Honestly, it's a masterclass in audio design just for this weather. Speaking of audio, the sound outside of the weather is top tier. The Kinglore Forest in particular has all kinds of noises going on constantly, from the chirp of insects to beasts howling in the distance. You know it's good audio design when I can tell what animals are nearby based on the sounds I can hear. Each one is unique and all adds up to be incredibly immersive. And on how much unnatural noises like gunfire or drilling stick out, and you can find your way around this map without even using your eyes sometimes. And of course the visuals here are no slouch too. If you're flying, you can see storms rolling in and see that transition from clear to chaos in real time. I remember one time I was flying around the floating mountains and a cloud enveloped the terrain I was on. My vision became short with white in all directions, making it much harder to safely get around. It passed in a few moments, but when it happened it was incredibly cool.
I've actually been high enough to be in clouds in real life, and it feels just the same. All of a sudden your vision is limited, and just as fast as it came, it goes. Again, small touches are adding up to an incredible experience. I just realised I got this far into talking about the world before I ever said it was an open one. I mean, it is a Ubisoft game, so it's kind of inherent, but still, I probably should mention it. After a few story missions, the world quickly opens up, and you can go wherever you want as each section opens up. So it's kind of a little bit limited, but that's fine. There are 3 in total, with another one set to release as DLC later this year, each of which has its own set of biomes and defining characteristics.
The Kinglore Forest is obviously a dense jungle with rivers weaving through the terrain, surrounded by towering trees and lush fauna. The upper plains are a lot flatter, obviously, and more rolling hills with large bodies of water, much wider trees, and the occasional collection of rocky outcrops. And lastly, the Clouded Spires has a huge mountain range taller than any one piece of terrain we've seen yet. Its valleys are filled with a dense fog, making navigation a nightmare, alongside dense alpine foliage and poisonous spores. They are each incredibly distinct, with the biomes within them being equally unique, making it easy to know where you are on the map without the need to open it up. Eventually, you'll learn which trees and plants grow where, and be able to work out what biome you're in from there. Now, it's not the biggest world I've ever seen in a game. In fact, I was a little bit surprised how small it is, but I really don't think that's a bad thing. I'd much rather we have this concentrated area where detail and care has been poured in by the gallon. Games with giant maps often are too large to fill with things to do, and 90% of the area is just empty space, or they just copy and paste activities to fill the gaps, naturally making for a horrible, repetitive time.
Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that this world is full of a diverse array of different things to do. There's plants to collect for HP increases and skill points, resistance labs to repair, and more RDA bases than you can shake a stick at, even though you can't shake sticks in this game. However, I do want to come back to this later, so I won't go into too much detail right now. What I will say is I found the world to be a good balance between being densely populated with things to do, but not to the point where I got bored of any one thing, at least as far as my playthrough to the main story is concerned. For sure, it's not perfect, but I enjoyed my time with it, and in the end, isn't that all that really matters? Because, you know, playing a game is supposed to be fun.
One last thing on the world while we're on the topic of activities, RDA bases and resource harvest operations are going on all over the map, and even without the map, you know exactly where they are for a large number of reasons. First of all, from a distance, giant plumes of black smoke kinda stick out in a world otherwise consisting entirely of greens and blues. And secondly, when you get close to one of these areas, the world becomes desaturated and polluted. Everything loses its colour and turns into a greyish brown. Animals are found dead and pale white. The RDA's influence literally takes the life out of the planet. Clearing out one of these bases shows you a cutscene of life literally returning back to the area. The colour returns to the plants, the animals move back in and reclaim their land. If you come back to bases you've taken out later, nature will literally have moved back in with moss and vines covering any machinery and grass taking over the polluted dirt. It's more little and, to be honest, unnecessary touches that make it so rewarding to keep pushing back.
While we're on the topic of life returning, I should probably talk about the actual living things in-game, because I just talked about, for how long about terrain and weather? Oh dear God.
Part 6. Navi gonna give, Navi gonna give.
The world of Pandora is home to, scientifically speaking, a fuckload of different species. Obviously you have the main players, the humans and the Na'vi, but then you have all the flora and fauna to think about. Am I really going to talk about plants and animals in a video game? Yes, and you can't stop me. Please don't skip forward. Really appreciate you watching this far if you've made it. At least ease into it by first talking about these species that you can actually verbally communicate with.
Humans first, since they're by far the most boring. Sorry humanity, take this L as consolation. The humans you interact with in-game are split into two camps. Literally. On the one hand you have the Resistance. These are your first allies in the game and consist of a bunch of friendly folk who have all abandoned their lives to live on this alien world and likely never go back to see friends or family.
Honestly, they sound pretty interesting, but aside from a single side quest where a lady is scared of starting a family because, you know, this planet is so bloody dangerous, most people we regularly interact with from here are just happy-go-lucky, overly friendly, one-dimensional characters. Nice to hear on the radio every now and then, but most of the time just feel like they're a step up from the fairy from Legend of Zelda, which, would you believe it, is also called Na'vi. I swear I didn't plan that. I mean, obviously I didn't make Zelda, but you know, I didn't include it in the script. You get what I mean. You also hardly ever see these guys outside of their base, so they really just feel like a formless entity on the radio that you never really get to interact with, and just feels like they send you off to do a little quest for them, which is exactly what they do. The RDA, aka the bad humans, are somehow even shallower. You know how the best bad guys make some sense and an argument could be made that they're in the right? Yeah, that is not the case here. Everyone from the basic grunts you see all the way to big boy John Mercer himself are just pure evil. These are like the worst dudes.
Basic enemies literally talk about being excited to kill Na'vi if you listen to their conversations. It makes them an easy enemy that you feel no guilt in taking down, but still it would be nice to have a touch of ambiguity just to keep things interesting. That being said, it's faithful to the movies, so I guess I'll give it a pass.
Don't let the weather dampen your spirits. Go out there and bag the blue.
Just in case you're wondering, we're the bad guys. Now for the far more interesting bipedal species, the Na'vi. Throughout the game, you come into contact with 3 or 4, depending on how you count, different tribes, and as you spend more time with each one, you'll learn a little bit more about their customs and their specific way of life.
Now to talk about all of these, I'm going to have to go into spoilers, but honestly, if you clicked on a video this long about a video game, I think you're kind of expecting that that video game is probably going to get spoiled at some point in the duration.
The ambiguity about how you count it comes down to the fact that you and your buddies kidnapped by the RDA are part of the Sarentu tribe, which has been missing for years. They were once a nomadic group of storytellers who were great diplomats, trading their stories for goods to survive. You'll learn more about these over the course of the story, which I'll cover in more detail later, but just know that your group is really trying to find themselves, so each member is a little bit of a mess. The Aranahe are the first other tribe you make contact with in the Kinglor Forest on your quest to unite the nearby clans against the RDA. These are weavers and dye makers specializing in creating colourful clothing. They're also the clan with the strongest focus on ikrans and flying, helping you to make your first bond fairly early on into the game. Whilst their part of the story isn't the strongest, I for sure liked their whole vibe the most. Their base is a smaller version of Home Tree from the first movie, and all the bright, vibrant colours are gorgeous to look at. The Zeswa live in the upper plains and are the horse-riding hunters and Zakru farmers, these giant beasts that they milk and care for. They teach you to ride your first dire horse and are a lot more willing to engage in war, with the 2 sisters leading the clan desperate to fight back. Last but certainly not least, you have the Kamatire. These are a hidden clan cut off from the others as it's believed they accidentally killed the Sarentu with a bad batch of medicine many years ago. These have the best story of the bunch if you ask me, since you follow up on that medicine to unravel the mystery of your clan. Each of these feels unique when you're in their base camp, but as you're wandering the world, you'll come across small groups of Na'vi out hunting, fishing, or some other day-to-day activity. If you approach them, they'll normally offer you some resources, which can be really useful if you're in a pinch. Honestly, it became useless for me pretty quick since I'm a little bit of a loot goblin. Now, while the Na'vi are far less shallow than the RDA and feel like real people when you come across them in the wild, there's one thing that I absolutely hate about them, and it's the exact same thing that I really hate about the second movie.
They all speak English. Like, you're wandering around this alien world and you hear the Na'vi talking about how they can't wait to have a brew, or talking about what they'll do if the RDA leaves. I mean, these conversations themselves are fine, but why are they speaking perfect English? I'm well aware that I might be in the minority, but let me build my case real quick. So in the second movie, everyone speaks English, but they excuse it because Jake says in his opening voiceover that eventually the Na'vi language just sounded like English to him, so whenever he speaks to Na'vi, it sounds like English because otherwise they'd have to subtitle the entire movie, which I would have preferred, but again, I'm probably in the minority.
Took a few years to get the language through my thick skull, but now when I hear it, might as well be English.
However, in-game, our character was taken as a literal baby and taught in an RDA facility where people primarily speak English. Now, I'm sure they learned Na'vi, but my voice literally has an American accent.
I can imagine Sarentu travelers gathering in a place like this to wait out a storm raging outside. They would make a fire, sit around it, and share stories from the clans they'd visited.
Would it not make more sense to have some Na'vi dialogue? If not for the main plot, then at least when walking around the world. I don't know, man, I probably don't have a leg to stand on, but I wanted that immersion because it just breaks it so much when you walk up to this clan of Na'vi living in a tree and they greet you with perfect Queen's English. It doesn't sit right with me.
Also, one less complaint, there's just not enough people. I know this is so the world can be the size it is, but each of the clans feels like a collection of about 20 people tops, making walking around their camps a bit like going to a party where they kind of forgot to send out invitations. To be honest, the density of people isn't so bad, it's more the camps themselves just aren't big enough to house that many people. I can get over it pretty quickly, but it was a little bit immersion breaking that you'd enter their home for the first time and see like 5 people standing around. As for the non-speaking roles, you have a wide variety of flora and fauna, each with their own specific traits, habitats, and behaviors. I'll talk about flora first because obviously they can't really behave in any way because they're plants, right? Wrong. Feel ashamed. While not every single plant, a large number actually do more than just sit there allowing their resources to be harvested. There are several species which explode or emit spores that can have a huge number of effects on your character. For example, the mist blooms emit spores which enhance your speed if you run or ride through them, giving you an extra hit of acceleration. However, the vein sacs, yes, that's literally their name, burst when you get too close, dealing damage but pushing you away from them. Both of these change the way you move around the game world, as you could just run in a straight line, or you could go from mist bloom to maintain a high speed and sacrifice a small amount of health to get a bounce off a vein sac. There are also other plants like Sol's Delights that are only safe to go near when the weather is dry, otherwise you'll get a nasty shock. Others still, like the flamingo orchid, that will attack you if you startle them, but allow their fruit to be harvested if you approach slowly.
There are dozens more examples, but the point is that every plant is different and changes how you think about moving around the world. It's not just a bunch of different plants so that they look different and that you have some variety in the terrain design. Each species has its own specific characteristics and was designed with care and intent.
There's almost as many kinds of different animals too, and since they can actually move and stuff, they have an even more diverse set of behavior types. The shy hexpedes are incredibly skittish and run away from pretty much anything, so must be approached with stealth. On the other hand, the stern beasts are much more territorial and will square up to you before charging. One small complaint I have about these guys in particular is that in the first movie, standing your ground or charging them down causes them to abandon their charge. In game, they just run at you no matter what, which is a little bit sad, but hey, you can't win them all. You have Thanators, which aggressively hunt you down, Stormgliders, which can swoop down onto you from above, knocking you from your Ikran, and the Sailfin Goliath, which is a lumbering, peaceful creature, boosting the quality of all nearby plants, and allowing you to bond with it for a moment of peace. I randomly stumbled across that last one whilst flying around, and it really was one of those moments that made me realise how much I love this world. Just taking a moment next to this huge, peaceful beast before jetting off to the next objective, it was honestly as much fun as any mission. There's so much diversity, and every species has its own habitat and behaviour, making each one a puzzle to track down and take out or avoid altogether. There's so much life in this world that you can hardly go 5 steps in any direction without coming across some lush fauna, terrifying wildlife, curious locals, or invasive humans. And if you want to soak up everything this world has to offer, you're going to have to take a lot more than 5 steps. Part 7. Traversal.
Obviously, in an open world like this, walking everywhere would take quite a while, and thankfully, in contrast to the previous game, you have a couple of options here to make things easier. You might have heard me mention the Ikran and Dire horses you learn about from the first 2 clans, but before I get to those, walking is no slouch either.
Obviously, it's not the fastest option, but it can be the most fun. You don't have the full parkour system like Ghost Run or Mirror's Edge or anything like that, but you have enough that moving through dense areas of foliage or avoiding enemies by scaling their structures is a lot of fun to do. You have a super high charge jump allowing you to climb most obstacles with ease, add on the very generous slide, and everything just feels great. It's really hard to nail down why running around feels so good, but it just does. One of my favourite parts of the early game was running along a giant log high above the forest floor, aiming for as many mist blooms as I could to maintain a high speed before taking the leaps across a huge gap. The lift vines dot all over the map help keep things moving, allowing you to quickly ascend or descend as you need without slowing your momentum with a long climbing animation. Everything here just feels fluid and right, from the charging and timing of jumps to quick mantling over objects.
Not to sound too much like a games journalist, because I'm definitely not, but it really makes you feel like...
As you progress, you can learn new skills to reduce fall damage with a well-timed crouch, giving you even more options for covering large distances quickly. Again, none of this is particularly complex, but it just feels right, there's no other way to explain it. Why, when it's absolutely faster to just hop on my Ikran and fly somewhere, do I sometimes decide to instead take a run and spend twice the amount of time to cover the same distance? I don't know, it's just fun. It's kind of like the web wings in Spider-Man 2. Yeah, they're the fastest way to get around, but swinging is undoubtedly more fun, so most of the time I stuck with that. Anywho, speaking of wings...
Now name her. She has made herself yours.
Floof! Yep, to say that this is another of those sequences that floored me is an understatement. Making the climb up the floating mountains and chasing my chosen Ikran all the way to the top where it sat waiting for me is something that I will not forget for a very long time. It's one of the best parts of the first movie, seeing Jake make the Bond for the first time, and getting to experience it myself in-game was pretty special. As for actually moving around the map on the Ikran, it's about as good as it can be. Don't get me wrong, compared to the first game, this is worlds, hell, universes better, but it's just the tiniest bit wonky, mainly when it comes to combat. Now, when you're not fighting, it controls like a dream. You simply face where you want to go, and the Ikran does the rest. It's not super advanced since you pretty much just press forwards and sprint when you have the energy to do so, and go as fast as you can, but it really nails down the feeling of momentum, especially during the dives. Going from the floating mountains down to the forest floor below in one long extended dive felt amazing, and for the first 10 minutes or so having my Ikran, I just flew around in circles, taking it all in. It helps that you can easily look around when flying, allowing you to take in breathtaking views without putting yourself off course. But by a country mile, the best part about the Ikran is summoning it in midair. You can summon it to your location at any time, and if you're on foot, it'll land as close to you as it can and let you climb on board. However, if you jump from something real high and you have enough space below you, you can summon it and it'll catch you mid-fall, throwing you straight into flight. This literally never got old with me hopping off to clear a map marker on the floating mountains, only to leap off the other side, get caught in midair and move on to my next objective. Even hours later, I was still doing this for a quick hit of dopamine. Plus, it's just more convenient, as well as fun, which is the perfect mix. One quick jump and you're in the air, compared to waiting for it to land and then walking over and setting off. Lame. That said, it can be a little bit inconsistent. If you don't have enough space around you, the summon can fail, and depending on the height you've leapt from, this can have some fairly disastrous consequences. However, even when that happened to me, I just found it funny most of the time, so the risk is well worth it. And I could fast travel. Alternatively. That did not work. Now, the combat, as I mentioned, is the weak point. If you aim, your Ikran will continue moving in a straight line, allowing you to fly past enemies and fire as you do so. I don't really think there is a better way they could have done this, but at the best of times, it feels awkward, and at the worst of times, you end up crashing into some trees, becoming stationary, and getting lit up by enemy fire. It's a lot better versus scorpions in the air since you can fly above and below them, and they're also fairly large targets with nothing around them, so it's pretty obvious where they are. But against ground troops, it's just not practical, and 99% of the time, it's faster, safer, and easier to just land nearby and take them out in stealth or an all-out assault.
Still, Ikran is absolutely the method I've used to cover the vast majority of my distance in-game. Nothing is as fast, as convenient, or as personal. I mean, you literally get to give it a name and pet it and choose what armor it wears. It's all cosmetic, yeah, but it's nice, especially if you get matching. Alongside the Ikran, you can also eventually ride the wild dire horses you find all over the map.
These control far simpler than the Ikrans, which makes sense since they're basically just faster, less agile versions of moving on foot. Tell them where to go and sprint if you want to get there faster. Pretty simple. Just like Ikrans, their combat is again pretty weak. Aiming whilst moving past something at high speed might look cool in the movies, but doing it yourself is super inconvenient and very difficult, and it's far easier to hop off and take care of things on foot. But the main problem I have with dire horses is there's not really much point in using them. In the story mode, you unlock your Ikran in Act 1 and the ability to use wild dire horses in Act 2, so you can literally fly before you can run, but it gets worse.
Remember how I said you can summon your Ikran to you pretty much wherever you are? Dire horses can only be ridden if you find one in the wild, hold E to soothe it, close the distance, give it a pat on the head, and then hop on its back. Now, once you've ridden it once, it'll actually wait around for you if you hop off and do something, which is nice, but still. I could do all of that, which takes about 30 seconds, or press H and hop on my Ikran without ever having to look for it. And again, you unlock the Ikran first. It's faster, can fly, so much more versatile, and can, fly up things, easy to get on, easy to get moving fast, and have a personal connection with it. The die horses are fine, and I did enjoy the first ride of them, which is another beautiful moment in the game, but they just make no sense to use pretty much ever. If they added the ability to get mounted faster or summon one in, I'd probably use them more, but at the moment, sadly, they're more of a gimmick. I get why they went Ikran first because, everyone wants it and it lets you take on the most types of terrain possible as early as possible. It just really kneecapped any desire I have to use the die horses, because once I could use my Ikran, I was like, oh, well, they're pretty pointless. And that's about it. You have your 3 options to move around the map, unless you count fast travel, but talking about that amounts to, so you pick a location, you hold F, you teleport to it, and then you're there. Until you pick up a skill much later on in the game, this actually consumes a big chunk of your energy, so I rarely did this if I could help it, which I'm not complaining about. After watching the second movie for research of this video, and I swear it's not just because I want to watch it, I don't actually like it all that much, and seeing all the water stuff, I really kind of hoped that we'd see some of those water beasties and be able to ride those, but I understand why we didn't, because that would add a whole new dimension to the world and be a ton more resources into what I'm sure is a fairly large project already. But maybe in another 14 years, we can finally take to the seas of Pandora in Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora.
You can swim in game, but it's more of a stealth feature than something you want to use to get around. Underwater you can't see much and move pretty slowly even compared to walking, so you don't really seek it out when getting around the map. Still, with all of these options in your arsenal, you have the options for getting all of the map no matter how high or far your goals may be. And in the world there's no shortage of goals, even outside of quests, and I suppose that brings us to Part 8, the side content.
As I mentioned earlier, this map is nowhere close to the largest game world ever created, but what it lacks in size, it more than makes up for in density. You can't go 30 seconds without stumbling across something to collect or do, and it makes exploring new areas of the map into a cycle of setting off in one direction, finding something to do, getting distracted doing that thing, repeat the last 2 steps about 38 more times, and realize you're now going in the complete opposite direction to where you actually need to be to progress whatever you were doing before, if you can even remember what that thing was. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every single mark you come across is a unique and bespoke creation full of its own story and personality, but what they do offer is variety, reward, and more often than not, something fun to do. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters to me when I'm playing a video game.
Also, just a mild complaint before I get into the actual stuff you can do. You can choose a setting called exploration mode at any point in the game, which turns off quest markers and instead it gives you a description of the objective's location, leaving it down to you and your map knowledge to track it down. For the most part, I really enjoyed this feature as it felt a lot more immersive and let me track down objectives rather than turning my brain off and flying towards a marker. Maybe like 5 times in the whole game, I couldn't work out where I was supposed to be going because all the instructions told me was to look in a 2x2 kilometer square of the map and it all looks the exact same, but for the most part, I really like this feature. However, a bunch of these side objectives appear as these little purple markers. It doesn't tell you what they are until you've been super close to them, but still it doesn't make much sense that I have to track down an RDA base we stole coordinates for, but know exactly where I can find a bellsprig? When you get close to these sorts of markers, you get this purple aura thing that you can use to track down exactly where they are. I would have been perfectly happy with just this to find them, but whatever. It doesn't ruin the game by any means, it just feels like they could have committed to the exploration mode just a little bit more. So now let's rattle off all of the different map markers you can come across in game, starting with the most simple, collectibles. These come in a number of different forms. You have the bell sprigs, which are special plants you touch to gain a little bit of max HP, gear baskets, which contain various pieces of gear, mods and Ikran cosmetics, and Tartu saplings, which are plants you touch to gain a skill point. Each of these take you a literal moment to complete and give you a quick low tier reward that are nice to have, but nothing crazy. I don't mind them being so common because they require no time all to clear on the map, and if I can't be bothered, I'm not really missing out on much. You have Ancestor skills, which are kind of like bigger versions of Tartu saplings. These grant you unique abilities only accessible through these plants, ranging from a small double jump, which makes no sense, but it's useful, so I'll give it a pass, to gaining the ability to rip pilots out of amp suits. These are far less common, with only 12 of them appearing on the map, so I made an active effort to collect them whenever I was even close. Most of them come in super useful, but again are not essential, so if you want them you can get them, but the game is still completable without. There's also a range of collectibles that don't have map markers, and these are part of separate side quests like comic books, computer terminals, kites and more. These have no markers, so are actually pretty damn hard to find, but imagine if the map had literally everything marked, it'd look like a damn Christmas tree. Most of these non-map marker collectibles just progress side quests or give you some story if you go looking for it. But aside from that, for the most part, they don't really offer you anything useful for your progression. I mean, they might give you favour with some clans, but if you're not taking part in the shopping system, this really is quite inconsequential. Speaking of pointless map markers, you also have data collectors, which are basically just minigames to find and turn on these little probes to progress side quests, which give you basically nothing for each one you complete. There's also Siren 2 memory painting, where you sit down and do this minigame that I'm sure is fine on controller, but is total dog ass on keyboard and mouse. Luckily, you can turn this on automatic, but there doesn't really seem to be much point to each one aside from some flavor text and ticking off the collectible sheet. Technically, they give you this temporary buff that highlights rare materials without even using your Na'vi vision, but aside from that, not much else. Siren 2 totems, however, do have some actual rewards and are a little bit less hassle to complete. These are basically puzzles where you follow signs to find the right angle to look at each tome from. Once completed, you get some flavor text and complete enough, and your character gets inspired to create some Siren 2 exquisite gear designs, which are pretty decent but somehow not the best in game despite being some of the most time consuming to unlock. Still, I'm just glad we're back to side content that actually has a point. While we're on the more natural side of things, you also have blade wing trails that require you to follow a cloud of moths which will lead you to a hidden fruit location, which is really just a high quality ingredient useful in cooking. And budding watchers are giant mushrooms which open up once you've touched their smaller connected plants, and inside you can find unique consumables which I never end up using because I might need them later. There's also Na'vi camps spread throughout each area which give you an option for fast travel once discovered, and contain facilities for crafting, cooking and passing the time. Each of these also has a clan contribution box, each with a specific item they're requesting. Fulfilling the request gains you a lot of clan loyalty and of course clicks a collectible box. God, Ubisoft really love their percentages, don't they? The Resistance field labs are basically just human versions of these camps. You can find them, turn on the power and have all the same facilities as before with the exception of the contribution containers. However, you can place items into your own storage, so that's pretty great. And finally, we have the 3 tiers of RDA bases. Installations are the smallest with only a handful of soldiers defending them. All you have to do is take out whatever structure they're guarding, they'll all leave and the surrounding area will be free of pollution. Outposts are larger and come with walls and turrets, many more guards and components to take out to bring them down. These work essentially the same but are a little more challenging to take out. If you manage to do all without raising an alarm, you'll gain increased rewards in the form of storage containers left behind by the RDA. And of course, all pollution is removed upon taking them down. And finally, bases. These are the largest of the bunch and are only really taken down during scripted missions, so for the most part act as a semi-permanent danger and pollution zone. You really just have to avoid these places until the story gets you to attack them, since even if you manage to make it over the walls, you sometimes can't do anything or take them out, so there's literally no point. This is one area of the game world that really doesn't feel alive, because if you somehow break into these places, there's literally nothing there, not even enemies. If you want to leave these for story missions, that's fine. Just have either infinite enemies that one-shot me spawn here. Simply having them sitting empty is just dumb and makes no sense.
All in all, map markers in my opinion are decent enough. Most offer rewards proportional to the time and effort needed to complete them, and others may not offer much in the way of actual usable reward, but give you some extra story and immersion in this world, so I'm not mad at it. I think the majority being clearable in under 30 seconds was the right way to go, so that it's less intimidating trying to clear out an area. The more time consuming options are a lot more spread out, meaning you can do them every so often without getting bored of the same thing over and over again, and it also taking you a bunch of time every single attempt.
Speaking of variety of things to do, even if most of them are super simple, it helps keep things fresh, and I was rarely doing the exact same thing a bunch of times in a row. They've all been placed in a way that means if you travel from one marker to the next, you'll end up doing all kinds of different activities in a row, rather than getting bored by any single one. Compared to the first game where the only side content was removing the fog of war and touching 5 trees, this is a masterclass, so after playing that, I'm on cloud fucking 9 going back to this. There's no shortage of other actual side quests, each offering their own smaller scale stories. Now, compared to something like The Witcher 3 or Baldur's Gate 3, are all the best games the third ones. Anyway, every side quest in those games could pretty much be its own main story with how much narrative is crammed into each one. This looks pretty shallow compared to that. But for the most part, each one tells its own shorter story and helps immerse you in the world just a little bit more.
I remember an early quest where a Na'vi guy asked me to go find some special ingredients to cook a specific meal. When I got back to him, he told me he learnt it from a Siren 2 who looks a lot like my character. Gee, I wonder what the game could be insinuating. Total time working on this quest, probably 20 minutes tops, but it gave me a nice hit of world building and emotional impact if I'm honest.
A lot of others are helping out members of different clans with odd jobs here and there, but most of them are just fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. Kind of like the movies. The rewards you get also fit into this camp. Most of the time it's a skill point or 2 or some resources for cooking and crafting. I completed the main story and went back to do some side quests that I'd left behind, and I got the feeling it was a little bit pointless since I was pretty much in final form already. I didn't really need points or loot, so all I was getting was story, and like I said, it's pretty damn hit and miss, so it was the tiniest bit of a drag sometimes. If you're not much into collecting resources yourself, then side quests might be more up your alley to keep you stocked up, but aside from that, they're just okay. It's mainly combat with a sprinkling of investigation and collecting here and there, so if you really love the combat, you'll probably have a great time. Speaking of which, Part 9. Bows, spears, and fully automatic rifles. In a complete contrast to the first game, combat here is pretty much entirely ranged focus. The only option you have for melee is punches and kicks, and against anything but human infantry, you're not going to get far with that. By the end of the game, you have a selection of weapons to choose from, each great for a certain job. The regular longbow is your workhorse. It has a decent rate of fire and draw speed and is capable of taking out infantry in a single shot and tagging weak points on vehicles and small animals, but it's not great versus heavy armor. That's where the heavy bow comes in. He has a much slower draw speed and fire rate, but deals considerably more damage, weak point or not. If you can't get a shot on a weak point on an amp, this is a safe bet with enough damage to punch through their windshields in just a couple of shots, exposing the vulnerable pilots beneath. Large animals also require use of this bow to take them down clean, so this is another that sees a lot of use. Now, if you really need maximum possible damage per shot, then the spear thrower is just about the peak. It's incredibly slow and cumbersome to fire, and I found it to be the hardest to aim out of anything. However, if you land a shot, it deals massive damage even without a weak point. I saw this one as kind of an RPG, useful for taking out a major threat, but for the most part I didn't really get a lot of use out of it due to the practicality. Then you have the short bow, and honestly, this thing is absurdly broken, and I'm so glad that they waited until super late in the story to give it to you. It's an instantly firing short bow that holds 3 arrows in reserve before you need to reload. Fucking reloading a bow and arrow gaming. It's technically short range, but for me seems to be about the same as the basic longbow. The fire rate is crazy, allowing you to do some truly wacky stuff, taking out multiple enemies in seconds. The damage is also pretty top tier, making it a viable option for taking on pretty much anything, since it's faster to fire 3 shots of this and deal as much damage as a single shot from the heavy bow. I still like switching between weapons to deal with enemies, but that was more for RP and fun than efficacy because this thing is wacky. Each of these has a basic arrow and also a special arrow type that changes depending on the weapon design you have equipped. They're all fairly basic stuff like a grenade arrow, some explosive power, fire to spread damage over time, or electricity to stun enemies in place. For the most part, I ended up using basic arrows and saving specials for large threats. And the last of the Na'vi weapons is the Staff Sling. This allows you to launch a variety of large projectiles like proximity explosives, gas to clear out animals, or siren pods which make a loud noise useful for distracting enemies. This is very situational and comes in handy more on certain mission types rather than in every single encounter, but it's good fun and a nice addition if you're hunting and want to clear the area of predators before you move in to harvest your hunt. As for human weapons, you have the assault rifle and a shotgun. For both of these you can aim down sights, which I'm totally okay with for a couple of reasons. First of all, our character hasn't really been trained on human weapons, at least not that we've seen, so they wouldn't really know to aim down the sights. And secondly, these weapons want to be seen as more of a last resort than a workhorse, so having them be a little harder to use for all applications helps facilitate this. Anywho, the assault rifle is exactly that. High rate of fire with low per bullet damage, but enough to chip down an amp in a full mag. You can also use high impact rounds to stagger amps if you want to move around for a better shot, but I never really saw much point since you could just hold down the trigger and wipe them out anyway. And the shotgun is high damage at short range. Again, great for taking out amps in close range in a couple of shots. You could also use shock ammo to stun targets, but again, there's not much point since you can take them down in a few shots anyway. Lastly, you have grenades which deal some low damage, but the real use they have is stunning enemy vehicles, allowing you to move in for a takedown or fight on their weak points while they're standing still. These I did use, but only really as a last resort to buy myself some time.
One thing worth mentioning is that for both of these human weapons, you can only find ammo in RDA bases or from dead enemies, whereas for the Na'vi weapons, you can craft every ammo type with items found throughout the entire world, and they're all natural things. There's also no way to silently use human weapons, and since stealth is a great way to keep things in your favor, using a gun before you're already caught is essentially pointless and counterproductive to a successful fight. Plus, outside of RDA combat, when hunting animals, taking them down in a single clean hit nets you the best resources, and neither of these guns can do that. Combine that with the fact that I'm trying to RP as a Na'vi, and I hardly ever use these weapons if I could help it. I kind of saw them as a weapon of last resort. If I really couldn't win, the shotgun came out.
Oh, you also have the hacking tool, or SID. This isn't just for combat, since a lot of RDA bases, resource crates, and computers also need this tool, but it can be used in combat, and I haven't mentioned it yet, so I may as well cover it here. It's used to hack into amp suits and automated turrets, and once the minigame is complete, can disable them, allowing you to easily take down the amp and permanently disable all turrets. It's only really good during stealth, since what amp is just going to sit there and let itself be hacked, but still, it can be an easier way to take down tougher enemies that you don't have the firepower to otherwise take down silently.
On the whole, combat actually feels really good. It's super fast-paced and enemies aggressively chase you to ramp up the pressure and keep you moving to stay alive. Most enemies can be taken out in a couple of shots at most, but if you're out in the open, you can go down just as quick, so it never feels unfair either way. If I was to have one complaint, it's that most battles are over in like a minute. Even the largest RDA outposts never felt like they had more than 20 enemies tops, and when they all rush you, as soon as an alarm sounds, you end up either dying or taking them all out in moments, especially if you're using special arrows or grenades. That aggressive hunting you down kind of comes back around to bite the game, since they move in so aggressively that if you just alert enemies and then camp yourself in a defensible location, they'll just run on over to you and die in a conveyor belt if you land your shots right. Another thing that annoyed me somewhat about this hunting down is that enemies seemed to know exactly where I was, even if I broke line of sight with all of them. I never felt like I could dip into cover, break line of sight, sneak around, get shots off from an unexpected location, since they seemed to be able to track me perfectly through walls no matter where I went. Now I can mentally put this down as I'm having a track on my heat signature or whatever and get over it, but still, it would have been better for the Na'vi fantasy if I could attack from in and out of the shadows, especially when I'm fighting on my own turf. Combat with enemies other than the RDA, aka the animals of Pandora, is just as chaotic. For starters, each species has its own tactic and attack pattern to keep things interesting, making each battle a puzzle where you need to work out the best approach to take them down. Viper wolves will attack all at once as a pack. Thanators will aggressively chase you down like the apex predators they are, and the Whipfangs will spit poison at you from a range, hampering your ability to locate weak points. Most wild combat encounters are very chaotic, with you desperately trying to take them down as fast as you can while still aiming for weak spots to make sure that you harvest the best resources possible. Personally, I always felt a little bit guilty fighting animals since the whole philosophy of the world is you only kill what you need. And most of the time, I'd run away if I didn't need the resources or scare them away with the staff sling to keep things balanced. There's also feral versions of some animals which are essentially super aggressive versions with no connection to AOR made by the RDA. They're just the same really, but you can feel less guilty about killing them since they offer no resources and in the lore are damaging to the environment. On the whole, I actually really enjoyed the combat, and I think it's because it's not really the main draw, if you excuse my bow-based pun. If all you're doing was fighting, then this cycle of different bows and arrow types will get pretty old quick, but you're only fighting for like 20% of the game at best, so when you do get it, it's more like a quick hit of high intensity action. The novelty of it doesn't really wear off, and it really does emphasize the point that combat isn't the main purpose of the game, and I'm okay with that.
It really helps that after I've crafted myself some new gear, more often than not, it changes up my special arrows, meaning I'm excited to see how they perform in the next combat I get into. Which reminds me, I still haven't talked about Part 10. Is this a survival craft game?
So while this isn't something like Minecraft or the Forest where you have to survive and build yourself a base, there are some light survival and crafting elements here, and I personally believe fit perfectly into the game and world. I just mentioned you have to craft all of your Na'vi ammunition with basic arrows and spears only requiring sticks, which are found pretty much everywhere, and the more advanced ammo types needing more advanced resources. Now I say more advanced and rarer, but don't think you're going to be using irreplaceable resources every time you want to use a fancy grenade arrow. They're still harder to find than sticks, but still, if you know where to look, these are some of the most common resources in the entire game. They just require a smidgen more paying attention and sometimes going out of your way.
The ammo capacities here are plenty generous, so it's not like you'll have to whittle away to craft a new arrow every single time you fire a shot. It's more so that after a decent battle against 5 or so enemies, you'll probably want to restock depending on what you used. Crafting these takes literal seconds as you find them on the weapon wheel, and provided you have the resources, you can make them instantly. It's more adding an extra layer of reliance on the world rather than the RDA to get things done. I very rarely found myself running out of ammo I needed and never ran out of basic ammo made with sticks, so as long as you pick up any of the common resources you see, you should be just fine. As for the more complex crafting like armor and weapons, these require specific material types such as roots for heavy bows or moss for headgear, with some late game recipes even requiring specific kinds of roots or moss. This meant once I was getting close to being underleveled for missions, I'd make myself a shopping list for each bit of gear I wanted and track them down. Which reminds me, level in this game is determined by your gear, not your skill points, so it's something you have to pay at least some attention to progress through the story.
If you remember from about 6,000 words ago, I talked about how every single bit of plant life has its own habitat and characteristics. That comes back here to be extremely useful, as you can use this knowledge to work out where exactly each resource is most likely to appear. Most resources have a common and rare variant which dictates the quality of the ingredients and eventually the stats of the final product. So you're not just searching for any old plant, you're looking for a specific rare variant of a specific plant to get the best possible stats you can on your gear, 3 times per gear piece and for 9 pieces of gear. This isn't even mentioned that each type of material has several options, each with different base stats and modifiers, meaning you can make the same piece of gear with dozens of different combinations and get something very slightly different, but impactfully different each time. That was terrible English. Or the fact that each resource has a specific set of conditions which get you the best resources ranging from time of day to weather conditions, and then you also need to harvest them cleanly by pulling in the right direction to get a clean break. I'm told this is very good on the PS5 controller, but I played on PC, so I'll go fuck myself. Personally, I love this and searched around for the best quality ingredients, and finally making that elite new item never really got old until I'd reached max level and couldn't do it anymore. At that point, it was very sad. However, I understand this might not be for everyone, and clearly the developers knew this too. In Na'vi settlements, you have the option to buy entire gear pieces, or parts, or ingredients, and going with this option might not get you the best items possible, but it will allow you to keep up with the level requirements for the main story.
The shop system in game doesn't really have a set currency, instead you contribute items to clan baskets in exchange for clan favour, which can then be spent on items. If you don't care about crafting, you can just collect whatever you find. donate it and use that favour to get some new gear. As I said, personally, I prefer crafting as it feels a lot more rewarding and authentic, but I appreciate there being an option for everyone. Over to the survival part of this survival craft section, you have the food system. This is extremely simple but can be used to great effect. Your character needs to regularly eat food to maintain a high energy level. This level slowly drops as you go about your life, being consumed faster if you take a lot of damage and need to heal over time. There are basic options like RDA rations you can find, or raw ingredients like fruit and meat. Alternatively, you can combine ingredients at cooking stations all over the map to create full meals, which fully replenish your energy bar and come with some extra effects depending on the components. These can be practically anything from taking less damage, being harder to detect, or dealing more damage. Certain recipes with specific ingredients can even combine more than one effect, making for some pretty wild buffs if you play your cards right.
Like I said, you can just scavenge for rations or buy food from the clans to help keep yourself topped up if you don't want to bother with the crafting. But I had a lot of fun deciding what to cook and eat for certain missions, and I cannot recommend this entire crafting system enough. It's not super deep, but it has enough variety that I was pretty regularly changing things up for most of my playthrough. Now, this entire system has one major problem, even with all my love of this world, not my shilling for this game for way too long, I can't ignore. The way you find these plants and animals and basically everything is with Navi sensors. And what are Navi sensors, you may be asking? Eagle vision from Assassin's Creed. You press a button and the whole world goes blue, highlighting collectible animals, plants, and enemies through walls. This means that instead of tracking down the plant types you need by carefully looking for them and searching their habitats, you instead go into their rough habitat and then look around with Navi vision to lead you straight to them. I mean, you can just ignore it and look for it yourself, but it'd take like 5 times as long for no benefit, so there is very little incentive. I don't know, it just feels a little bit cheap that we have all this info on how to find a certain species so we know what area to look in, but once we get there, we just do an ocular pat down of the area and just do a big Robocop scan. There's the resource. It's not the worst thing in the world, since it does make it actually possible to find some items as well as tell you the quality so you know what it's worth before you collect it, but it's just a tiny bit too overpowered for my taste.
Especially against animals and RDA enemies, I don't mind being able to track an animal from their scent, but highlighting them through walls is a little bit much. RDA, however, is far worse since you can permanently mark them, so you can always see every single enemy through walls, making stealth or combat into a wall hack simulator. Feels like tagging was a little bit unnecessary, but what can you do? Nothing's perfect.
Overall, I still really like the whole survival and crafting system of this game, and it all really comes back to the fact that this world is just so beautiful. In a more generic, boring map, these systems would be pretty boring themselves, but the fact that I may have to fly up to some floating mountains and collect some moss, and combine that moss with a tooth found on a creature that's only found deep in the heart of the rainforest, it all just makes it feel alive and it makes sense to me. Exploring this world is the main draw of the game for me, and these systems encourage you to do just that in a way practically no other game does. If you know of another game that does this, tell me, because I'd love to play it. I'm constantly on the lookout for high quality ingredients to mark on my map. Locations with no name or marker are memorable to me because I know I can find useful loot there when I need to craft something. From the first moment to the last, I was on the lookout for anything high quality just in case it came in useful later. Like I've said, you can totally ignore basically all of these systems, but if you did, I think you'd miss out on a major part of the game and have a vastly inferior experience. Speaking of experience, there's one more thing that I have to talk about, and that's
Part 11. Mad skills. Can you tell I'm getting bored of naming the chapters?
Okay, this is probably going to be one of the shortest parts, and honestly, thank God, because this video is already so far off the rails, so it really should be shorter. Anyway, skills in game are separated into 5 trees, each with their own focus.
Survivor is all about keeping you alive with increases to HP, energy, and the amount of healing items you can carry. Warrior is all about loud combat, increasing the amount of damage you deal and capacity for offensive items like ammo and grenades. Hunter is all about hunting, shockingly enough, so has skills to increase your efficacy using stealth, gathering ingredients from animals, and damage to weak points. Maker is all about crafting and increases the power of crafted items, how many you can craft at once, and your expertise at gathering components. And finally, Rider is all about the Ikran. This improves its stamina, ability to regain it, and allows it to take down flying enemies by itself. Well, you have to be riding it, but I digress. Nothing in these options is groundbreaking and really changes how you play the game. I can count on one hand the number of skills that actually unlock a new action you can perform, but that isn't really the point of these. Ancestor skills are how you learn new actions, and unlocking them through exploration makes a lot more sense in the context of this world. These skills are instead here to provide you with some basic buffs to make your character better at everything they're already doing, without pushing them over the edge to being overpowered. My favourite parts of these skills are their apex challenges. These are unlocked once each tree is completed, and set you an objective that once completed will unlock further powerful effects for your character. Again, it's nothing crazy, but I like the idea of having to earn that final skill instead of just pressing a button and unlocking it. Each of these are really strong and worth going out of your way to pick up if you can.
The progression system as a whole combined the crafting skills and buffs found throughout the world, and these skills here, it works great for me. No one part feels super strong and encourages you to push all of them forward at the same time to keep yourself moving forward. It really shows that Ubisoft looked at their first swing at an Avatar game and how goddamn terrible the progression was there, and decided they're not making the same mistake twice. It feels like a great deal of thought and care went into making sure all of these systems work seamlessly together and are rewarding to progress no matter which way you prefer to do it. You can rush through and get to max level pretty much as soon as you enter the third area if you want, or you can take your time and only level up as you need to continue progressing, instead of forcing artificial progression down our throats with constant level ups, making the game far easier than it should be. We're instead told, if you want to keep up with enemies, you'll have to make sure you're prepared. And I love that. On topic of progress, I'm gonna kill the dog. On topic of progress, I should probably stop putting it off and finally talk about
Part 12, The Story of the Siren 2.
Yeah, the story's fine.
Part 13, Why Karlach is the best companion in Baldur's Gate 3.
Gods, I want to ride you till you see stars.
I'm at the
Just kidding, that bit is incredibly outdated. The story isn't anything groundbreaking, but I would say it's at least as good as either of the movies. Now I know that's not a particularly high bar to clear, but still, the last game didn't manage it, so I'm not complaining this time.
Earlier I mentioned the starting series of cutscenes up to escaping the RDA facility and joining up with the Resistance. After this, you're tasked with going out into the Western Frontier and reaching out to the local Na'vi clans to get their aid in taking the fight to the RDA and Mercer. For the most part, this is all you're doing, going to a clan, asking them to join, then completing a series of jobs for them until they say yes. It's nothing crazy, but it's enough to keep you moving forward with likeable characters, some dramatic moments, and the odd tragedy here and there, followed by a big battle as the Avatar formula goes, and by God, we're going to stick to that formula. However, in Act 3, all of a sudden, kind of started getting good, and I really got into it. After getting the first two clans on side, for some reason the Resistance acts like you won, and as a party, this obviously and literally blows up in their face with Mercer finding their hideout and blowing it off the map, catching you in the process. With the help of some guy who I honestly felt like was introduced right then and there, you managed to sneak and fight your way out, destroying their base but losing your buddy in the process. Rest in peace, guy. You will be missed. I think your name was Jimmy or Billy, I can't really remember. After you escape, you find out that Taylan, one of your fellow Siren 2 escapees, has been talking to Mercer the whole time and told him the location of the base, under the impression he'd take it peacefully, which for some reason he believes despite this
That's one less loose end.
being one of the only other things we've seen him do. Anyway, after this, you locate the Resistance survivors and continue the hunt for the lost healer clan to help you injured. In the process, you end up tracking down an old RDA base where you were first taken as children. This sequence is one of my favourite missions in the game because all of a sudden you're out of the huge open space and into a dark, dingy facility with flickering lights and distorted alarms and voice log. It's nothing actually scary, but I like when stuff takes a creepy turn. You even come up against a few Thanators that somehow broke their way in. This would be scary if I hadn't been easily taking them down for the entirety of the game, but I digress. Eventually you make your way all the way through and find out the audio log is from Alma, the Avatar lady who'd basically been your teacher and mother figure. Remember I mentioned her about 5 hours ago at this point? Turns out that obviously she was part of the team that took you from your clan as children. It plays this as a revelation, but like, how else was it going to turn out? She's not going to think you just appeared one day. Anyway, after fighting your way out past the RDA that turn up, you head off to find the campsite mentioned in the audio log where Alma was going to meet with the Siren 2. When you get there, you piece together what happened and put together a memory from childhood of the RDA appearing and gunning down all adult Na'vi so they can take the children. The upside of this is that you can go and tell the Kamatire that they're not responsible for the death of your clan, but obviously it's not exactly party time again.
This little horror sequence is really cool, and the backstory here is actually interesting, even if it is a little bit predictable. I think because it's such a shake-up compared to the normal story, it really helps be more impactful.
After this, you take the Kamatire healer back to the Resistance base to help heal your wounded, including Alma, who's been in a coma since the explosion in her avatar body, despite her human body being totally fine as far as you know. This makes literally no sense to me, but whatever. Moments after she wakes up, the Siren 2 children ask her about what happened, leading to one of them stabbing her and running off. You then take her to the Ancestors Circle in the Kamatire camp and look into her memories to get a full story of what happened. She went along with Mercer, telling her that the guns are just a precaution that they're going to ask to bring the children in voluntarily as part of an ambassador program between the RDA and the Na'vi. Obviously, as soon as they get there, the soldiers open fire killing everyone because they're the worst, but the children who are taken by the RDA. And well, that's how we got where we are. After this, her avatar body dies, and you almost immediately move on to yet another badass sequence. This game really picks up here, and I don't know why.
Honestly, they should have spread these out a bit because it took me 341 words to tell you the entire story up to the good part, and over 400 to tell you about just one sequence of missions where all of the interesting plot happens. Up until now I was going on my phone during cutscenes because it was just generic conversation about the Na'vi, joining the Resistance and blah blah blah, I don't care, but now I'm glued to the screen. Speaking of which, the next major sequence sees you investigating some seismic readings which turn out to be this giant drill in the upper plains. Not entirely sure how they built or dropped that there without anyone noticing it, but whatever, I can get past it.
What they do to the land, the RDA, that is death, which is why that thing must go. I haven't been able to get too close, but there's definitely...
There was Zeswa hunting down there. Call Priya. I'll look for survivors. Priya? Priya, can you hear me? Come in.
The drill fires up and immediately devastates the surrounding area. You make a long walk towards it, checking for survivors, coming across many dead Na'vi and animals on the way. Obviously, you're going to shut this thing down, then the battle to do it is really badass, and the dumbass that I am accidentally hit turn off shadowplay instead of save, so I didn't get any of it, and the game auto-saves. Great, so just imagine what it looks like. Wow, isn't that cool? Anyway, shut down the drill, collect some data, and get out of dodge. All in all, a great sequence with a ton of impact and intense gameplay, aside from that defend the area bit at the end.
I just shut down choppers and eventually I stopped sending them. In the final minute, I was just sat there on my phone, scrolling Reddit, waiting for the time to pass, but honestly, it just made me laugh thinking that they gave up because I just kept shooting them down, so like, whatever. I'm not that mad about it, but it's ridiculous, man. They just stopped coming, they just gave up.
After this, you have a bit more running around the map, clearing out RDA bases and stealing their data to find out their endgame, and you eventually narrow it down to Mercer's giant drilling operation. Again, I'm not really sure how no one noticed this giant base until now, but whatever. His master plan is to plant a giant explosive deep underground and level the surrounding area in the process, so obviously, we can't let that happen. We gather the clan leaders and move in to get more intel from some radar balloons, only to get kicked out of the system by some mysterious RDA hacker. Making our way through a nearby outpost, we break into the control room, and golly goshness, it's Taylan, who's working with Mercer. Still, after Mercer did this, and told him no one would get hurt. Okay, sure. Anyway, he runs away with the RDA but leaves behind some plans showing a secret route into the drill base. We make a plan with the clan leaders and make our way inside through the caves and eventually fight through waves of increasingly powerful enemies. We finally reach our old pal and apparently he's on our side now because, no shit, the RDA are literally the most evil people in the entire universe. Took you a minute, lad, but better late than never. Anyway, with him on side, we work our way through the base, disabling automated defenses to allow our allies to move in, all the while chasing Mercer and this giant explosive. We finally track it down, take out its fuel supply, and send it to the surface to minimize the damage. On our way out, we literally get caught by Mercer and a giant arcade claw, and after a brief sing-song, our old pal turns the claw on Mercer himself, and we leave him to burn with the base, getting out just in the nick of time, thanks to our Ikran. We gather up the squad and watch the base blow itself from the map, then look out of the frontier with the remaining Sarentu, deciding to rebuild the clan rather than stay with the Resistance. How exactly we'll manage to do that with 3 people, I'm not sure, but I'm not in charge of such things, so I don't mind.
All in all, I'd say the story here is perfectly good for a game like this. Let's be honest and say that the world and the exploration and the mechanics in that world and exploration are why you should play this game, not the story. But towards the end, things get a lot more interesting and give you some real reason to hate the big bad RDA outside of the usual they're evil colonizers bit. Which, you know, they are, and that's not good. Yeah, Mercer is your standard mustache-twirling evil villain who's one note for the entire game, but he's unlikable, so it works just fine. Like I said, this plot is easily at least as good as either of the movies, as low a bar as that is. I still really like both movies, so obviously, I really like this too. Of course, the main bits I like are all the world building and learning about the different clans and Pandora itself, but I know we need some conflict because otherwise it'd just be wandering around the jungles for not much of a real reason, and I'm sure eventually that'd get old. Eventually. There's still the DLC on the way, so I'll be interested to see where they take the story this year, all being well, but what's here now gets a thumbs up from me. A solid 7 out of 10 story. Just good enough to keep you listening whilst you're looking at your phone and occasionally look up to see what's going on. But with scoring in mind, after all this rambling on for quite honestly far too long, I should probably just answer the question.
The last part. So is the game any good?
I honestly don't know what to say for this part now. I love the game, I love it. But giving it a score feels wrong. Objectively, this game is not a masterpiece, and it's probably about on par with every other open world game that Ubisoft has released. You know, since that's all they do apart from Anno, which I love. But to me, this game is incredibly special and one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had in recent memory. It's not dethroning Dredge as my game of 2023, but that's not the point. Call me pretentious all you want, but I don't see this as a game. To me, this is something that I've wanted to play and experience since I was 9 years old. Yes, I'm that young. I'm sorry. This is the closest I can currently get to shipping off to Pandora and controlling my own avatar and becoming one with the Na'vi and something I've literally dreamed about for years. How can I possibly give that a review score? Do you give your dreams reviews? This game means more to me than a number out of 10, so I'm going to refuse to give it one. That's right, you just sat through this entire video, and in the end, I'm not even going to give it a score. What a goofball I am. All the reviewers, if you care, are placing this into a firm position as a mid-game with a nice world, and objectively, they're probably right. Is it objective? It's one of the two. The one that means if I'm ignoring my own feelings. But to me, this is one of the most enjoyable rides of my life, and despite the many, many, many failings of the game, and to be honest, Ubisoft's game design for the last 10 years, I absolutely love this game. It may not be perfect, it might not even be great, but I will not forget it for a very, very long time. And once the DLC comes out and it's been put on maintenance, I'll be very, very sad to say goodbye, but incredibly excited to see what comes out next in the Avatar gaming franchise. If anyone's still watching at this point, thank you. Honestly, this video got a bit out of control in some areas. I just started writing and I really couldn't stop, and it was over the Christmas period, and I got so excited and I found enjoyment in something that I just loved it. Obviously, this is one of the first times I've done a video like this, so let me know what you thought. If you want to see more ridiculously far too long video essays, you know, YouTube doesn't have enough of those, let me know. If you played this game, let me know if you enjoyed it down below, and I guess that's about it. I've already talked for far too long, so goodbye, have a great rest of your day, and play this game. If you even slightly like the movies, you won't regret it.